Okay, so let's get started here. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Scott Kennerly, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Optimal Dynamics. And just as a quick intro for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, Optimal Dynamics is a software platform built specifically for trucking companies that allows you to optimize your entire network. So that's from planning decisions such as which freight to accept or reject, to execution decisions such as asset versus brokerage, which drivers to assign, et cetera. So it's a single platform for planning and execution. Just a little bit about us. We were founded in 2017. We've raised over just north of $56 million, and we are headquartered here in New York City, though we are dispersed across the country, much of our team. That's enough about us. We're not here to hear about us today. So today I'm excited to introduce, we have industry veteran and our EVP of Sales and Strategic Partnerships, Chris Torrance. And he's joined by Volker Bargenda and Bob Stevens from Standard Logistics, who are one of our key customers. So Volker and Bob are going to discuss how their technology approach has really helped them drive growth over the past year and help them prepare for the turbulent market moving forward. Just a note, after the discussion, we'll have some time for Q&A. Please just submit any questions you have through the QA chat button throughout the discussion, and we will address those at the end. So with that, I'm going to go on mute and I will hand it over to Chris.
Thanks, Scott. And again, to reiterate, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I know everyone's time is valuable. So again, certainly appreciate everybody tuning in today. And, with me, as Scott said, we have Volker and Bob with Standard Logistics. And gosh, I think our relationship started, it's been over a little over a year ago, maybe give or take. So maybe before we get underway, as Scott kind of gave an overview of Optimal Dynamics, maybe beneficial. Volker, do you want to maybe a quick intro on yourself and really provide a little bit of an overview for the audience on Standard Logistics, considering you guys rebranded not that long ago? And maybe, Bob, if you have any other comments, then please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do so, Chris. Thank you. And great to be here with everybody. So glad you can join us today. So Standard Logistics, we rebranded in July. We used to be known as Hawk Logistics. And really the history of Hawk was it's basically a private fleet for GAF. GAF is the country's largest roofing manufacturer. And we're owned by a holding company out of New York called Standard Industries. And so given the name of the parent company, like I said, we rebranded as some of the Standard Logistics. We're currently really got 3 segments in our business. So we run a fleet with about 300 trucks spread across 17 hubs all over the U.S., pretty heavy in Texas, in the Northeast, Southeast, and out in California. But our headquarters are in Dallas. We run a freight brokerage business that we launched about a little over a year ago. That's taken off here very, very nicely. And then we run a couple of warehouses, one in Dallas and one just outside of Philadelphia. In terms of me personally, I've been there now a little over a year and a half. Spent 15 years prior to that at DHL. Last 5 years, I was responsible for the DHL freight business in North America. So DHL freight is one of the divisions within DHL, focused on road transportation, and came on board then with Standard Logistics to take what was that private fleet and kind of grow it aggressively and turn it into a kind of for-hire commercial logistics company. And that's exactly what we've been doing over the last year and a half.
Awesome. Well, Volker and Bob, do you want to give a quick overview of yourself?
Sure. So yeah, like Volker said, thank you so much for having us. My name's Bob Stevens. And so my role is manager of fleet and 3PL operations analytics. So what that means is I'm really the person who's, so I've come on with Standard in the last year and a half, as we've really kind of hit the gas pedal on our growth and everything. So I'm the person responsible for all of our analytics supporting all 3 of our operations. So I do work with our fleets, our brokerage, as well as our warehouse. So I came on a year and a half ago, and I was the person who was the early contact with our relationship with Optimal Dynamics. So I've been along the ride for the whole way since we've been working with you guys, and excited to be here and talk about what's to come.
Yeah, thanks, Bob and Volker. And like I said, I happen to have the privilege, along with our CEO, Daniel, to attend that rebranding ceremony in Dallas, a few months ago during the summer months. And what an event, right? So I was very impressed with not only the rebranding, but remarks from leadership, including Volker, and as well seeing the new office upstairs. So very impressive. Got some questions for you guys. So just kind of you mentioned the growth, and again, I think that's probably an understatement from what I'm seeing. So when you talk about doubling the size of your fleet over the past year, obviously technology plays a role in that. So when you talk about navigating that complexity, how have you guys leaned on tech vendors and navigated some of that complexity using technology in general? So again, this is very open-ended. So Volker and Bob, you may have differing perspectives, but love to hear again how technology has really enabled that type of growth and navigating those new uncharted waters as Standard has doubled in size.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Chris, and I'll take a stab at it, and then Bob, you can chime in here. To me, it was really kind of, I had looked at technology solutions before we really embarked on the growth, because I figured you can't really grow without having the technology to support it. I mean, you can grow and throw more bodies at it, but it's really not efficient and very productive. So, Bob was one of my first hires because I knew we needed somebody to kind of crunch the numbers and be really smart about it in terms of analytically, and sort of evaluate what technologies are out there that's going to help us fuel all that growth, right? So we more than doubled the fleet in the last year or so, and added new locations, and obviously added drivers and equipment. And so with that, we had to really break out of the status quo in terms of how we used to do business and get used to a new way of doing business, because it adds complexity, it adds more work, it adds a whole bunch of things that we haven't even thought about. And so to me, it wasn't going to happen without the right technology partner. And I think that was sort of why we kind of very, very early on in this growth journey, settled on Optimal Dynamics after we looked at a couple of options to make sure that when we do grow, we have a solution in place that will help us get there, and will help us get there in an efficient manner, not just, growing for the sake of growing.
Yeah, well said. And Bob, I'm guessing you probably, again, you mentioned earlier, you've been a part of the journey since the early days of the partnership. Any additional context or insights you have to add on that question?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that I've learned over the last few years, one, just being involved in supply chain and transportation in general, even prior to my time with Standard Logistics, was, so I've been through my career involved on both the carrier side and the shipper side. And what we've learned over the years, talking with different technology vendors is, at least from my own experience, it seems that a lot of investment and advancements in technology have come on, if you talk about a TMS or transportation management system, something that's tailored towards big shippers like a GAF or whomever. A lot of the advancements and investment in those technologies have come from those sorts of companies. And when you look at what carriers are using, it's a lot of old legacy systems, things that have been built in-house or things that have been used for a long, long time. And what I've seen from Optimal Dynamics is a company that we saw that right away. It was a company that was trying to invent something, a totally new way of looking at freight technology specifically tailored for a trucking company. So for me, when early on, when we started talking, that was something that jumped out, and something that I haven't personally seen for many other vendors across the industry.
Yeah, and I would second that. Again, people often ask me, I've left companies like Uber and Forkites, and often say, what at the end of the day, right, it all comes down to decision. And Optimal Dynamics is kind of market ourselves as decision layer, this decision analytics company. And I think all this technology you mentioned, right, is primarily, Bob, as you stated, kind of been catered to the shipper community. Not to say that the carriers have been completely neglected, but I like to think that companies like us, our OD, are starting to really make an investment in that carrier community to help them, again, ultimately make these better decisions. And there's a lot of great data out there. And I think, again, at the end of the day, it requires a lot of brain power. And frankly, at least for me, I just don't have that capability, right? So I think the genesis of OD started with, how do we leverage machines and computers to help make these decisions, while also understanding the notion that, and at least in my opinion, right, Bob, Volker, we're not going anywhere, right? At the end of the day, this stuff is meant to complement existing technologies and systems that you have in place, not a rip and replace mentality. So we can augment some of the decisions that your teams are doing day to day, and ultimately help them drive a little more visibility into what things they hadn't even considered. I think that's a win for everybody. So as we kind of transition a little bit, we talked about growth, right? It's going to be a continuing theme here. That's not simple, right? And a lot of We look at companies that have tried in the past and obviously encountered quite a bit of turbulence, understandably. But when you talk about historically, how has it been, there's a difficulty there to assess the growth opportunity. So can you give us some insights, and maybe, through Optimal Dynamics and other tools that you guys use, how do you even begin that process of especially through the growth that you guys have experienced of really, evaluating the network at large? I'd love to hear some insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in the past, prior to Optimal Dynamics, it would have been Google Sheets, frankly, right? So, I mean, you kind of, use your data, you dissect it and reorganize it and try to figure out, does this all fit into the network and what is going to be the overall impact to this versus what the investment is that's required, right? And that's obviously not a way to really grow aggressively and be relatively certain that you're going to make the right decision. I mean, you can get pretty far with it, but it's very inefficient, and there's a lot of room for error, obviously, and you're never going to actually capture the complexity that comes with growth, right? I'll give you an example. We're looking at opening up new locations. Those new locations are not on an island, right? They're not just like, hey, I'm going to open up a fleet in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, for argument's sake, and I'm just going to look at Tuscaloosa, but that's going to impact our fleet in Dallas, our fleet in Tampa, our fleet in Charlotte, North Carolina, because one way or another they have touch points, right? And they become part of that network. And there's no Google Sheet, no matter how good you are at it, it's never going to really truly capture what it means for your network. And so with the Optimal Dynamics tool, we're actually able to plug in the kind of what if scenarios, like what if we had 20 drivers in Tuscaloosa? What if we added 5 drivers in Statesboro, Georgia? And all these sort of scenarios that we're discussing and constantly sort of reevaluating. Finally, we can plug it into a tool and kind of figure out, okay, this is what it means. It may not be 100% perfect, but it gives us a really, really good indication whether that's a good idea. And then, with, I think, couple that with on the ground knowledge and, your team's sort of expertise in terms of what's happening and some of the constraints, I think then you're in a really, really good spot to make a decision in terms of how you go forward. And that's been the difference for us, right? Because otherwise, I think we'd still be spinning our wheels trying to figure out where do we go next, and with how many people, what does that look like, and how much money are we going to make? Because you invest in these fleets. I mean, I don't have to tell you, you got to find drivers, you got to buy trucks, you got to buy trailers, you got to open up a freight terminal. None of that comes cheap, frankly, right? So you've got to be very, very close to being 100% sure that this is the right thing to do. Otherwise, it gets pretty ugly pretty quickly. And so having that sort of extra layer of decision making and the analytics with the tool, given us a lot of peace of mind in terms of making the right decision.
Yeah, well said, Volker. And, again, I go back to my TMS years and hearing executives say, Chris, do you ever think there'll be a day where we can, kind of simulate these future scenario planning, as you said earlier, Volker, and not have to push something into production? As you mentioned, there's a lot of capital involved, a lot of moving parts. And, of course, things don't always work out. And, many moons ago, if you were to hit the green light and press that forward and it didn't work, right, it's some pretty dire consequences. So I think this digital twin concept has certainly resonated within logistics and the broader supply chain community. And I think, again, you guys serve as a great example of the advantages of being able to kind of plan into especially in the future planning scenario of what might happen. Again, it's not an exact science, but I do think that's going to be a huge shift in the way that the industry tends to focus on. Before we push things in production, let's the whole measure twice, cut once mentality comes into play, and I think that's certainly relevant within trucking as well. So, Bob, let me shift over to you a little bit, since you've been kind of more on the day-to-day. Again, reiterating, you've been involved since the early days. So based on, what kind of benefits have you seen thus far when you've implemented this new type of technology within the team that you work with in terms of freight planning and other decisions that are made operationally?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, I could go on and on, so I'll try to keep myself short here. But so first, just to talk about how our company is using Optimal Dynamics. So there's 2 tools that we're primarily using, and I know there's more to come, but to date, there's been the strategic, what you call the digital twin modeling use case, and then there's also the day-to-day operational, which is you have a list of loads and it makes the load acceptance decision, and it gives you insights on which drivers to use and all of those sorts of things. But just to start on the strategic end, to call out what Volker was talking about is, we have a lot of industry people who've been around trucking forever. They understand the business. You could have those people sit in a room, and we did just that last year. We were coming on board with optimal dynamics, but we also needed to make some quick decisions in the near term. We sat together and we came up with a plan of, here's the country, and we think we have great opportunities to expand into certain markets, and we came up with projections. And then right around that same time was when we were getting up and running with optimal dynamics. And we were able to take all of those decisions that we hammered out in a war room and put it into the strategic scenario builder and say, create all sorts of scenarios. You can say, here was our entire network growth plan of, these are our existing domiciles and we're adding drivers here, and here's how the model reacts. But then also, we're throwing drivers into new domiciles that we've never been before. And you can see how all of those things are moved as you tweak the levers and plug in new things and inputs and everything. So that was extremely helpful for us, so part of what Volker said is, we can get ourselves a lot of the way on our own, but to have this sort of tool to take something that might have taken you weeks to come to a decision on and be able to run all those scenarios in a matter of, 20 minutes, half an hour or whatever, and see all the results is extremely valuable, especially when you're in a time crunch and you're in a market where everybody's, fighting for limited truck resources and drivers and, opportunities to hire drivers sometimes come up in their very short window of when you actually can do that. So key differentiator for me is how quickly we're able to make the decisions using these tools that we have with OD.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Bob, go ahead.
No, and then just to kind of elaborate more on the operational use case that we have.
Please.
So, that's strategic, right? So you can see, it looks at your network, it creates the digital twin of how your network is reacting and what lanes you're hauling and at what price and everything. And then, you can use that to sort of fine tune those levers. And then those things that you input actually flow into the day-to-day load acceptance version. So basically it's taking decisions you make on the strategic end and it's flowing those into the day-to-day. So if you have a group of dispatchers or whoever is responsible for picking freight at your company, the model is, again, using all those inputs that you've created to make those decisions for you. And it's telling you on a load by load basis, which ones are going to be favorable for us, which ones are not as favorable, which ones you should pass to your brokerage or even an external carrier or whatever. All of that stuff is right in front of you now on a day-to-day basis. And that's been very helpful for us so far.
Yeah, and that's great context. And again, I keep going back. These are extremely complex environments that we all play in. And traditionally, you've had a lot of planners sitting in one room and the execution folks on the other side. And in my experience, whether it's been a shipper, carriers, brokers, right, there's really a lack of communication. So one of the things I think about this type of technology is having that, as we call it, a strategic sync, right, where there's constant learning that's taking place from the folks, the operational decisions, feedback into how that affects strategic planning in the future. And then, of course, the executive teams, leaders like yourselves are able to kind of go back to the boardroom and start to evaluate things at a much higher macro level that, will understand the impact. So I love that reinforcement learning that takes place and breaking down the silos that previously existed to have that sync kind of mentality. I want to ask you too, and maybe this again, Volker, Bob, either one of you guys could take this one. We talk about drivers, right? There's a lot of the driver community and the driver pool that's obviously been brought on through the growth that the Standard has had this year. When you talk about driver expansion, Bob, you kind of alluded to it earlier. Have you guys have any examples on how you've kind of been able to win over those fleet and driver managers through that expansion and, being able to build trust with them that, hey, this is something that maybe we hadn't seen before that we've now been privy to through these type of technologies? But what's been any initial feedback from those folks that kind of on the front lines with the drivers?
I think, certainly on the planning side, right, the planners, I think, see the value because it sort of pushed the boundaries in terms of what they had traditionally been doing, right, and what they're doing now in terms of new lanes. I think, but it even translates into, we work very, very closely with all of our drivers. And I would argue that, our biggest plus is sort of our culture and the open communication between, management and ops team and drivers. And so even, I think, we're sharing, very openly, like, hey, we're working with optimal dynamics with our drivers and we're making decisions based on what the algorithm is telling us. And I think there's even buy-in at the driver level saying, hey, these guys are really looking at making sure that, when I do my job, I add the most value I can possibly can to the company and to our customers, because I know they've looked at it, they analyzed it, and when I take that load, from Alabama to Texas, I know that this is the right thing to do, and I know there's most likely going to be a backhaul for us, or some sort of triangle combination. And so when that guy returns at the end of the week, I think he feels satisfied in terms of, hey, obviously he's going to get paid, right? He's got to drive and he gets paid, so that's certainly a plus. But I think just from a job satisfaction point of view as well, right? They feel like, hey, we're really optimizing how we're using the driver's time. And with that, they feel like, I've had a good week. When they come home Friday night, I've moved these 4 loads and I've really done a great job, and everything was on time, intact. And, I think that helps with retention to a degree, right? Because they can see, like, we know what we're doing and put a lot of thought into it, and we're sharing what that thought process was. And with that, everybody kind of wins in my mind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see going into this upcoming year here, how the dynamics of the market shift. And I think that's one of the things that the optimization tools really need to take into consideration, that the weather's not always sunny, right? And what happens when there's a major shift in the market? How does that impact the driver community, the owner-operator community, versus many that are, turning in keys and going into the bigger fleets, right? And it'll be an interesting year. I think that's one of the big conversations that's taking place as we round out 2022. Kind of shifting again, I think this is all great conversation, but at the end of the day, there's going to be people that sit there and go, well, great, I like what I'm hearing from Volker, Bob, great discussion. What advice would you give for people that may be kind of on the cusp of taking on these type of technologies, but may have a little bit of apprehension for whatever reason? And maybe to elaborate on that, maybe talk a little bit about some of the wins that you've seen through this deployment process, and maybe some of the challenges. So again, advice, wins, challenges. Love to hear your thoughts on that from Volker, maybe at a strategic level, and Bob, your input would be equally valued from more of the operational analytics side.
Yeah, I would say, one piece of advice is you really got to know your business and your numbers and your data really well before you embark on this. I think that was certainly a learning that we had on our end, that we needed to understand what our cost structure truly is, right? Because per location, per driver type, our equipment. So there was a lot of work that we had to do basically to make sure that that's accurate, because it's just garbage in, garbage out kind of.
That's right.
Right, and that applies certainly here as well. So from that perspective, I would argue, frankly, even if we had decided not to go with optimal dynamics, but went through that exercise of cleaning up our data and better understanding it, that in and of itself would have been a huge value add in terms of how we operate and run the business going forward, because it just had to be done, right? But I think that is step one in all of this. Do I have the data? Do I fully understand it? Is it accurate? If that's the case, then I would argue there's very little in terms of risk, right? Why not try it, I guess is what I'm saying, because in the end, you're going to get another opinion that's based on a lot of really, really cutting edge technology and a lot of smart folks that, working in optimal dynamics versus how you've been running the business. And it gives you just another point of view, and you can then decide, which way do you want to go, or meet somewhere in the middle in the end, right? But certainly it gives you that option in terms of pushing your thoughts outside the norm and challenge the status quo. That never hurts anyone to really get, basically sort of another opinion and see what else you could be doing there. But those are, I think, the 2 key takeaways, I would say. Certainly get your data in order.
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to Bob. Just, I'm sure you got some interesting insights of your own, but Volker, you make a great point. As any technology vendor will tell you, the garbage in, garbage out analogies, it's very pervasive, right? And I think one of the things we've noticed as a learning in-house is, we're essentially, forcing, if you will, to companies to really reevaluate their master data. And it's kind of like that spring cleaning every year. No one wants to do it, but you need to do it. And I think that applies too in the tech space. And I'm a big believer in saying there's a lot of things you uncover about your organization you didn't know by having a unified discussion around how, whether it's data, process, et cetera. And hopefully companies like us help kind of at least get that discussion going, and I think everybody wins in the end. So Bob, anything else to add on that topic? Again, when you talk about some of the challenges that you guys face, some of the wins, and any advice you would have to folks in your shoes, maybe more on the fleet 3PL analytics side.
Yeah, totally. So from my experience implementing OD with our group, I would say just some advice would be to try to highlight the quick wins that you're able to get in the beginning. And that's the way that you're able to showcase the value to the teams that are actually the boots on the ground people
Excellent
making the
point.
day-to-day decisions. Because, for example, we had some instances early on where the load acceptance tool was giving it was saying basically our planners were running in tandem when we were implementing, like gaining adoption. So they were doing all their normal work, and then OD was making its suggestions, and we were kind of running side by side. And our planners were saying, well, it's, OD is giving us, it's saying that a lot of our loads that we've accepted are good loads. And our point was, well, that's great. That means you guys are doing a great job. But now you have this tool that's essentially agreeing with you, and it's taken out all of those steps that you took yourself independently, whether it was on a spreadsheet or just because you know how, and it's done that work for you. So now all you have to do is say, okay, I trust the tool, and go for it. So there's a little bit of that, is, people are stuck in their ways, but you want to highlight the quick wins. And I think that becomes very apparent as you use the tool. So that was my main advice.
Yeah, well stated. Again, at the end of the day, it's a lot about building trust. So yeah, well, guys, as I look at the clock here, I'm about probably have to get interrupted as we kind of approach the 30-minute mark. Yeah, I guess Sarah, I believe, is kind of moderating this, or Scott. I think we wanted to see if we could get a few questions from the audience, and if you have anything, please fire away. Hey, you want on mute, maybe? All right. Well, let me see if I can come up. Let me see if there are any coming in right now. Okay, let's see. All right, here's one I think we'll probably take another hour talking about this one, but wanted to, again, I think we're all seeing a major shift in the market, as I said earlier, guys. Where carriers and brokers have been obviously having a pretty big heyday in the last couple of years, post-COVID, where, we're seeing the market kind of shift in the shipper community having the upper hand. And you guys have, with Standard, you have kind of great perspective all around with GAF, et cetera, as you mentioned, Volker. Do you think, we talk about collaboration as a very common topic, and again, we'll abbreviate some of the answers, but do you think there's ever going to be a day, and do you think technologies like OD can help finally bridge the gap? You hear this 1 + 1 = 3 kind of analogy, this revolving door of who's got the upper hand. And this is just a very subjective question, but do you envision technologies finally being able to bridge the pendulum power swing that takes place on this, that I consider plagues a lot of our industry? And again, it's just, I think there's a broader industry topic here, but I think as a collective, if we can leverage technologies to bridge some of those gaps, maybe we can all win in this. So again, just quickly here in the last few minutes or so, any ideas on that? Any topics?
I would imagine, it's going to take a while, obviously, right? But over the long term, I would imagine that, it will create a level playing field, because we can't, as an industry, not go through these volatile ups and downs. I guess we've been doing it for a long time, right? But it's just mind-boggling. You think, 1 year you got thousands of carriers going bust, and then 2 years later they're all printing money, right? And that's just not healthy, I guess, right? And so I would imagine, as there's more adoption across the industry with technology, and we're sort of smoothing out some of the ups and downs, I would expect that eventually it'll be kind of more like a win-win scenario that is not quite as volatile as it is right now. As carriers get more sophisticated in terms of finding loads that are profitable, even in challenging markets, they'll be able to better survive, right? But also as shippers, when they have the upper hand, using technology, I think it'll create an equal playing field to a degree, right? It's kind of like, just like your typical consumer now, right? Everybody can go on the internet and compare what the prices are if you're buying a T-shirt, right? And you can see it's $2 more here and $3 cheaper over there. I think eventually we'll get that as an industry, but it's going to take really definitely a few more years.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Volker. And all right, well, we're about out of time. I'm going to end with one question that I like, and it's kind of, we touched on it just a little bit, but I'll let Bob take the first crack. But I'm going into next year, guys. Any big bold predictions for the industry that again, any answer will suffice? Bob, anything?
Oh man, that's a tough question.
No wrong answer.
Bold predictions. I think, to Volker's point, I think there's a lot of economic indicators that are saying that things might be, markets might be tightening next year and things might be getting tougher. I would say, I think companies that leverage technology like this are going to be positioning themselves to make it out much better from those situations. So I don't know how bold that is, but I think the idea being the smarter we can be about how we're working, the better off we'll be next year.
Awesome. Hey, like I said, no wrong answer. Volker, anything last to add before we kind of wrap up?
No, I think it's a great point from Bob, and certainly, we're looking forward to continue the journey with Optimal Dynamics. Bob said it earlier, right? We've been at this now for a little over a year, but I know there's more to come, and we'll certainly kind of work hand in hand to continue to leverage the technology and your new products as we go forward here.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, Scott, do you want to take us home here, and we'll call it a day?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And thanks so much, Volker and Bob. That was outstanding. I really appreciate you guys joining today. We had two more questions that came in just about OD. One was about, are we going to show up in Canada? We don't have specific plans at the moment to expand our company to Canada, although it is certainly on the plan in the medium-term plan to approach customers in Canada. However, we're pretty specifically focused on the US for right now, but we have started to dip our toe up there. So I would say stay tuned for that. And then there was another question on tiered pricing. And absolutely, our customers range from about a 70 truck fleet all the way to 8,000 truck fleet. So we certainly have pricing to fit all types of customers and have customers kind of across the board. So thank you for those are great questions. Thanks again to everybody. Thanks everybody for joining today. If you want to see any more content about what we do, you can visit our YouTube channel. We've got lots of webinars and other information up there. If there are any other questions that we didn't get to, someone from our team will be reaching out to answer those via email. So thanks very much. Thanks, Volker. Thanks, Bob. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your afternoon and the upcoming holiday season. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks so
Thanks
much.
again.
Take care.
Likewise.